In one of the most famous letters of the 20th century, Martin Luther King's letter to Christian ministers. He came to Selma, Alabama, and they said, "Why are you coming here and causing all this disruption? And, you got arrested, and, how could, you're a minister. How could you come here and cause trouble when you're not even from this area?" Martin Luther King says, "Look, the laws here are laws of the state. There's a higher moral law that goes beyond just the laws of segregation, which is what was happening in the South." So Martin Luther King was speaking from the foundation of those basic principles, that there's a transcendent moral law that says we cannot abuse each other. What are we segregating? One human being from another human being? It's so interesting now that we have DNA studies. Every one of us has every kind of person, Black, African American, the Hispanic, the Middle Eastern. There's no human being that has just pure blood. Every one of us is part of the human race. And we have, if you look back even on a common sense level, how human beings develop, we're all part of the same gene pool. And yet here, in an absurd way, the states in the South segregated people in terms of schools and buses and where you can eat in a restaurant. Total absurdity. And Martin Luther King came to point out that absurdity based on religious ideals. But then practical policy was change the law. The nonviolent activism was a practical policy strategy to transform culture to get back to those original principles. So also with the Vietnam War, many religious groups, Methodists, I used to give counseling to young people in colleges that if they were sincerely conscientious objectors to war, here is material put out by the Society of Friends, the Quakers and the Methodists. Many of the religious groups pointed out that there was something terribly wrong with American policy in a land that the French were there exploiting Vietnam, then we came in after the French were defeated at Dien Bien Phu, and we came in and we were defeated. We talked about, well, we're going to save the people in Vietnam and so forth, but we lacked those first principles. We were looking at strategies that colonial powers had used, and we tried to supplant them in many ways. So religious groups stood up against that. Also now, another area of public policy is very important in terms of social policy. Many religious groups, in fact, Catholics and evangelicals, perhaps for the first time, are working together to focus on the health of the family. That if families break apart, it's necessary to shore up families by emphasizing the covenanted relationship within a marriage. Hooking up is not the answer. The answer, that hooking up is like a contract. I'll do this for you and give you this pleasure if you give me this pleasure, and we'll stay together as long as we give each other pleasure. Unfortunately, as human beings, we get older. And golden lads and girls all must, as chimney sweepers come to dust. Shakespeare. And the reality is that we need to look at the problems within the individual life. Individualism has gone amok. We need to balance it with the common good, the principles that guide us as a human community. The same thing with families. If families break apart, what hope is there for the continuity of generations, the well-being of generations? How many people get married and are thinking about how their children and grandchildren will live according to certain principles and ideals? That breakdown is very serious in a culture. Even the village atheists, who lately are publishing all kinds of books about how negative religion is, fail to understand that they are imbibing, they've already received 4,000 years of love, compassion, kindness, all the things that religion is about. They can throw out the religion, but they're actually living out those same values and ideals. Why are we a people that emphasize so much kindness and love? In any kind of emergency, America is always ready to do whatever it takes to help people, and other countries as well. Those are the principles of kindness and love. How did we make it so far as a human community? Was it only conflict? Was it only the survival of the fittest? Is there not a powerful force within us that seeks well-being, that seeks kindness, that seeks compassion? Those are the first principles of which public policy, strategies, projects, and so forth have to be based. So also, Reinhold Niebuhr points out, and again, the danger of religion. Just because we profess religion and call ourselves the children of light doesn't mean there's a great deal of darkness within us. All human beings are fallible human beings. So we have to be careful about professing that we are the militant and triumphant group finally. You know, all religion is heir to that pride that goeth before the fall, pride that causes destruction and breakdown. There's no straight line between theological doctrines and political policies. Debate, discussion are very important. That's why a democratic society is important. We can express from our fundamental principles how best to apply practical policies. And that's very complex. It's not necessarily easy, but it is the basis by which we hopefully will emphasize the dignity of others. Last night I was reading a book called The Bully Pulpit about Teddy Roosevelt. There was a coal strike in Pennsylvania. The owners of the coal mine got together because Roosevelt called them together with the workers who were working 12 hours a day and children working in terrible conditions. The owners of the mines treated the representatives of the workers in the worst kind of way. But Roosevelt actually had his secretary copy down the entire proceeds of the meeting. And when that was published, people saw how one group didn't even want to talk to these other people. They treated them like vermin. Once that happens, obviously, human beings can be awakened and say, my God, there really is a problem here where people are not even treating each other as human beings when they meet together. So again, we cut ourselves off from those first principles at the expense of everybody. So there's got to be a balance between freedom and order, between first principles and public policies, and again, the prudence and the caution of how we apply our first principles to specific practices, specific projects. So religion offers a transcendent moral vision of purpose of human beings and society. And like Martin Luther King, we always have to touch in with that transcendent, ethical, loving law, or else we are so prone to abuse each other. Religion at its best teaches humility, compassion, forgiveness, justice. All of those things we've learned in education are basic within the youngest child, developing empathy at every stage level so that a child can learn how to embody compassion. Nourishing the child's fairness so that it can become social justice. These strengths are within each child and have to be drawn out, but they're within each adult as well. It's a lifetime process of cultivating compassion. It's a lifetime process of understanding how best to use God's wisdom in public policy. That's why religious people always pray, God, give me wisdom, give me love, so I can know how practically to apply the ideals of compassion and the ideals of love. But then there's the importance of religious communities. Religious communities at their best are like families at their best. They're people who look to give feedback and say, well, why did you do this? You know, it looked like you were hurting this other person. How do you resolve that conflict? Can we do so with compassion and fairness? Just like with children in a school, we have to do the same thing in a religious community. When someone betrays another person or violates another person, it has to be corrected. In a healthy religious community, those things can be done because there's a foundation of those transcendent loving principles. So Jacques Maritain, the famous Catholic theologian, says that love and friendship are the very soul or animating force of every political society. Politics is how we live together in the polis, in the city. If love and friendship are the guide, then the quality of life in the city should be that of peace and of justice. And our political leaders, ideally, when there's difficulty, they're not looking to cut each other down, but to lift each other up. If one program didn't work, let's make something else work. If every major development country has a first principle that everyone must be insured and all children must be cared for, no child must go hungry, then perhaps we can learn from those other countries that is a principle that's a healthy principle. We need our people to be healthy. We need our children to grow up in a good environment. So again, it's an animating form. The principles allow us to understand more clearly how do we take care of our polis? How do we take care of our people, our community? That ideal is important as a foundation for practical purposes. We're not looking to cut down Democrats or Republicans. We're looking to come together as a human community seeking justice and love. But we have to even talk about those things. What is compassion as the basis for the next medical policy or health policy? John Adams, reflecting the ideals of almost all the founders, said our Constitution was made for a moral and religious purpose and people. Our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. If we are not moral and religious and we have democracy, one group may become very wealthy and have lobbyists that skew the benefit of the country. If we're not moral and ethical people, we're always looking for loopholes to get more than someone else. Then we have a nation of scoundrels rather than a nation of friends. Genuine friends are not looking to get something from another person. We're looking to seek to benefit the other person, to bring blessings, to bring well-being. That's the ideal of our culture. Richard Newhouse talked about religiously based values are the points of reference for political and moral discourse. So religious values, what we're calling first principles, these are the touchstones by which we can then talk about political policy, economic policy, social policy, the quality of art, how we can evaluate whether we have a healthy culture or not a healthy culture. Certainly we should have ideals that reflect, okay, this is healthy culture, this is not healthy culture. This is economics that does serve people with the greatest good for the greatest number, or this isn't, this exploits people. In each area of culture, in every form that is a cultural expression, we have to have some benchmarks of what is well-being and what is not well-being. Where do those benchmarks come from, if not the best of our religious principles? And for 4,000 years, over half the world has been working off of those Abrahamic principles. The ideal of a loving God embracing his children who are children of God and have responsibility. Again, the most difficult thing in religion is that it confronts us with responsibility. That's why often people feel guilty. I don't want to have anything to do with religion because it makes me feel guilty. Why? Because it says you got to love God and love people. You have no choice. You have a choice. You can choose not to and self-destruct, which is what happens in human history, or you can choose to be responsible as much as possible. It's a lifetime discipline, but it's the goal that all human beings ideally aspire to live in a society of peace, justice, friendship, and love. Thank you very much.